All right, we've been listening to testimony from Chief Deputy Reeve Pallo from the Chickasaw County Sheriff's Department, among the many first responders we have heard from today who responded to the absolutely horrific scene. The apartment of Zachary Koehn and his girlfriend, where their 4-month-old Sterling was found dead, his body, his diaper crawling with maggots. Authorities have testified today they believe the baby had not been moved from the swing chair that he was in for almost a week, or changed for that matter. It is really tough stuff to listen to. I want to quickly discuss some key points with my guests. In studio with me is Elura Nanos, a Law and Crime columnist, and via Skype we have Lisa Wells, a criminal defense attorney. I want to ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Elura, here. Just a few moments ago, we saw body cam footage from one of the officers when he first arrived to the scene after Koehn called 911. He responded to the scene. Koehn is sitting in the other room on his bed with his 2-year-old daughter. Were you at all surprised by his demeanor, very calmly answering questions about Sterling, about how he discovered he was no longer breathing?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when I first started to watch this, I actually walked into the room and saw that body cam footage. And before I even heard the sound on it, the first thing I noticed was that the body language did not make sense. It just doesn't add up to a parent whose child is in the next room dead. Even if it were an accident, I mean, you would just think that this person would have some more emotion. But sadly, this is what we see from people who have extended histories of drug use, which of course is what leads to this type of child abuse. This is not really as uncommon as we would really hope to believe that it is. And I think that we're seeing evidence of this man's state of mind just from the really odd look of his just general demeanor at that time.
Yeah, I mean, Lisa, as a criminal defense attorney, I'm just wondering, how much does a video like that hurt the defendant, or does it? When in the moments after he's called 911 and officers have responded to the scene, he's not frantic that his child isn't breathing or something happened. He's sitting calmly. Granted, he has the older child with him, but how does that play for him?
Not well. That is very difficult for a defense attorney to overcome. It's something that you have to wonder what is going on with that individual at that time. Is he on something? What's going through his mind? How long did he have to process this information? I mean, it's got to be obvious the child is dead, and it's very difficult as a defense attorney to work with facts like this, to be honest.
I'm sure. We're going to get into some more of the facts that we've heard so far in this trial in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. Much more ahead here on the Law&Crime Trial Network. Welcome back. Some breaking news on the death of notorious mobster criminal James Whitey Bulger. TMZ now reporting that Bulger was reportedly beaten to death by 3 other inmates this morning. Now, according to TMZ, Bulger was in a wheelchair. The 3 other inmates wheeled him into a corner that could not be seen by surveillance camera and then proceeded to beat him until he was unconscious. TMZ reporting that one of the other inmates used a lock in a sock as a weapon, and they are also saying that these other inmates attempted to gouge Bulger's eye out with some type of shiv, but were unsuccessful. TMZ saying that Bulger then fell to the ground covered in bruises with several dents to his head. Now, of course, the FBI has only said so far that they've opened an investigation into his death. They have not given any of these details. All of this information coming from TMZ, citing a prison source. Again, they're reporting saying that Bulger was killed by 3 other inmates who beat him unconscious, one of them using a lock and a sock, and that these inmates attempted to gouge Bulger's eyes out with some type of shiv, but were unsuccessful. Obviously, this is a developing story, lots of information coming out. We will stay on top of it. We are also still working to get you that live interview with a family member of one of Bulger's alleged victims. In the meantime, we want to come back out to our other big story, and that is, of course, the Zachary Koehn murder trial out of Iowa, with this absolutely tragic, heartbreaking story of the murder of a little 4-month-old baby boy, Sterling. Right now on the stand, law enforcement enforcement and first responders to continue to testify about what they encountered when they responded to the crime scene and interview the defendant. Let's go now live. Well, the Zachary Koehn murder trial still going on live right now in Iowa as yet another first responder talks about the gruesome scene, the really disturbing details of finding little 4-month-old Sterling in his baby swing. Experts have testified today they believe the baby may have been in that swing for 9 to 14 days without having a diaper change. There were maggots, all different kinds of maggots crawling all over him. Prosecutors say the facts of this case go far beyond neglect. They show circumstances manifesting an extreme indifference to human life. I want to bring in my guests to talk more about this case. Elura Nanos in studio with me, Law and Crime columnist, and via Skype we have Lisa Hill joining us, Lisa Wells rather, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. In their opening statements today, the prosecutor said, look, at its base, this is a horrific case of a child dying of diaper rash. This child, literally, they were so neglectful, died, of absolute neglect from a diaper rash, and nothing that is heard in this courtroom can soften those facts. Do you agree with that, Lisa, that it's going to be really hard to soften any of the horrific facts in this case?
It is so hard when you're talking about 9 to 14 days. I mean, if it had been something that, was just based on ignorance of, caring for an infant child, or even, maybe, unfortunately being on drugs and just not being in their right mind. But 9 to 14 days is so difficult to overcome the extreme indifference to human life, which is what they need to prove in order to make their case. The criminal defense, the defense has a very difficult job in this case, very difficult. I would have tried my best in this case to have worked out some sort of deal if I could have, because it's inflammatory to hear these facts.
Yeah, I mean, and Elura and I were just sort of talking about that, had a deal been offered, and talking about the statutes. What's interesting, Elura was doing some research. Zachary Koehn facing first-degree murder, child endangerment charges, but that statute is a little bit different in Iowa in terms of the first-degree murder charge.
Well, yeah, I mean, and what we're seeing here is the application of a statute where it's being applied, differently than we often see in other first-degree murder cases. Typically, when we're analyzing a first-degree murder trial, when the victim is not an infant, what we're really analyzing is whether or not the evidence points to premeditation. That's kind of the main thing that we're usually looking at when it's a first-degree case, because premeditation can be very difficult to prove, and it can be also difficult to explain to a jury. In this case, we actually don't need the premeditation, because in Iowa, the statute says if you kill a child during the process of committing child endangerment in a way that shows an extreme indifference to human life, that makes you guilty. So it really takes out that sort of intentional, I'm trying to kill this victim element. And what it does is it says if you find as the jury that what this person did was really egregious, which clearly these facts point to, then you have to find this person guilty. And it really doesn't come down so much to the mental state of the defendant, which is unusual for murder prosecution in the first degree. Here, it's really just about the circumstances, and any layperson can look at the idea of a baby being in a baby carrier, not bathed, not fed, not changed in days and days, and say, clearly, this manifests an indifference to human life. So I think this is going to be a very easy one for prosecution.
Yeah, I mean, hate to put you in this position, Lisa, but as a criminal defense attorney, I mean, what direction would you try to take this in?
Well, to be quite honest with you on this one, I would have done my best to have tried to work this out before it went to trial. When first of all, the defense loses about 80% of the time in a trial anyway, and with facts this awful. And when you're talking about old people, babies, animals, you really got a very sympathetic jury. There is not one person on that jury who's not going to be sympathetic to this child. And this is just the defense. I mean, I hate to say it, but the defense it probably has less than 1% chance of not even that would be generous on this one. I would not have wanted to have taken a case like this to trial. And I do wonder if the defendant himself forced this issue, or if that was just if it's a Hail Mary for the defense. Honestly, it's baffling that that I would never want to take a case like this to trial. It's a bad case.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and we don't know about sort of the back and forth and what went on between attorneys and Keehn. Court now on a quick break, so you're actually looking at some previously recorded footage. Quickly, before we take another break, there is, it seems that the defense may try to argue that Cheyenne Harris, the child's mother, Keehn's girlfriend, had postpartum depression, and that is what caused the baby's death. Now, does this kind of argument work at all, Elura? You know, he's saying he thought his girlfriend was taking care of the baby. Turns out she had terrible postpartum depression and didn't even know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. I think that there are cases that could work. This just isn't it. I mean, if you had a situation where, for example, a child was beaten, okay, where we really don't know who did it, and one defendant points to the other defendant to say, that person did it, it wasn't me. Or maybe there was a more acute, specific time where some specific medical attention was withheld or something like that. But you're talking about days and days here. It makes no sense. I don't care what kind of shape that mother was in. This guy has no possible excuse other than I wasn't there. And he was there.
I mean, Lisa, you had said maybe for the mother. I mean, even for the mother, you know, that would be a bit of a stretch, I would think, for the defense. But for him to argue her postpartum depression led to the, you know, death of the child, that he's totally innocent in this. I mean, does that fly at all?
I mean, unless he just didn't live at the residence and he was just completely unaware.
But he did, as far as we know, right? So yes, but.
Okay, yeah, well then I would never.
We're having a bit of audio, a bit of an audio issue, it sounds like right now with you, Lisa, so we will come back to you in a second. In the meantime, as I mentioned, court in Iowa on a quick break. We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have much more on this Zachary Koehn trial and the other top crime stories, including the Bulger death case, making headlines today. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Stacey Delikat, and thanks for hanging out with us this afternoon. While the main trial we have been following this afternoon, the Zachary Koehn murder trial out of Iowa. Koehn accused of murdering his 4-month-old baby son, Sterling, endangering him. Really, this case is about gross and utter neglect of the child. The judge in that case has called a quick afternoon break. And so while that case is on break, we're going to take a break from that and bring you today's top crime stories.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. A man suspected of impersonating a Secret Service agent was reportedly arrested in South Carolina. 17-year-old Thomason Michael Barrett Hand was caught with a badge, a gun, and a vehicle with blue lights and a siren by deputies in Greenville County. Hand allegedly spent the weekend flashing a fake badge and handgun pretending to be a law enforcement official. Hand now faces 4 counts of impersonating a law enforcement officer. A man in North Carolina was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole for conspiring to kidnap a baby his girlfriend cut from their neighbor's body and lying to police about the horrendous crime. 33-year-old William Hone pleaded guilty to 2 charges in connection with the killing of 22-year-old Savannah Graywind of Fargo. Hone's girlfriend, Brooke Cruz, cut Graywind's baby from her womb and is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the killing. Hone pleaded guilty to conspiracy to kidnap and lying to authorities, but was acquitted of conspiracy to commit murder. A man in Texas is in hot water after a video of him allegedly yelling racially motivated insults at a woman and her 2-year-old daughter was caught on camera. The unidentified irate driver can be seen screaming at Jeanette Sebrew at an intersection in Houston.
You're driving in 2 lanes, you stupid bitch.
Yes?
That's not how we drive in America. Trump's deporting your illegal cousins today, bitch.
Really?
Sebrew filed a police report, but no charges have been filed. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
All right, well, I'm joined live in studio by Elura Nanos, Law and Crime's columnist, and we have Lisa Wells with us via Skype, joining us from Atlanta. She is a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. So, ladies, I mean, I'm just wondering that no question, this is morally wrong and really outrageous that this unidentified driver would scream these things at a woman, just, you know, that he found on the road. Trump is here to deport your illegal cousins, learn English, using expletives. But Apparently, the woman, Janet Sobrio, who filmed the video, it's now gone viral on Facebook, as Anthony said, did report this to authorities. I'm just wondering what could be the possible penalties or crimes, if any, that this driver could face. Elura, any thoughts on that?
I mean, certainly it could constitute harassment, depending on where exactly it happened, what that statute says. Although most of the time, for it to be real serious criminal level harassment, it does need to come with a threat of some kind, and we don't really have that here. Also, it's just one incident, so if it does constitute harassment, it's going to be relatively low level, maybe a misdemeanor. It's unlikely to be anything very serious. Potentially, it could be something that she could establish civil liability, because I think there was a child in the car, right? If I'm taking that case, I would maybe be going after some kind of intentional infliction of emotional distress. But looking at that guy's car, it doesn't look like he's got a lot of money to satisfy a judgment.
Lisa, what do you think? Do you agree on what potential penalties, charges he could face?
I don't think he could face any charges at all. I mean, he's just rude, and there's I live in Atlanta. I encounter rude jerks every day on the road, and it's just amazing how we've just lost our civility in this country, but you can't prosecute everybody just for being a jerk.
Right. Well, look, I mean, you have to imagine in this day and age, this video goes viral, these things spread so quickly, very likely it's gotten back to the man, perhaps, in that community, and everyone, of course, is outraged by this and his behavior. I mean, we've seen this happen before here in New York a few weeks ago, about a month ago. There was corner store Caroline, a woman who was caught on tape yelling at a young black boy, claiming that he had assaulted her. That wasn't true. That went viral. These people are sort of shamed in the social fear, and that is punishment in and of itself. They're forced to apologize. And
what we're seeing in a lot of these cases, because of social media and the ability to share the videos, we're actually seeing in a lot of cases that these people are facing some very real consequences in their life that are actually exactly commensurate with what they've done. In other words, they're not really being prosecuted, because that's not really the appropriate response to this, but they are sometimes losing jobs, losing business, and they're basically being made to face the very real consequences from society for their actions, which are deemed completely unacceptable. And in that way, I actually think that all of this social media is a very good thing, because it's making people be accountable for their actions.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with that assessment of that. All right, well, we're going to go back now to our top story, the horrific murder trial, Zachary Koehn, taking place right now, day one in Iowa. There is a short afternoon break going on. All morning we have been hearing from various first responders and the medical examiner, people who responded to the scene, examined little Sterling's body after he was found dead. In the meantime, while we are on this break, we want to now go back to the prosecution's opening arguments in case you may have missed it. Even if you didn't, it sort of kind of gets you back on track for where this case is going. So let's go ahead now and listen to that. Well, there you heard the prosecutor say that Zachary Koehn failed in his responsibility to care for his child. He failed by his actions. He directly caused Sterling's death. Now, the witnesses today have begun to sort of lay out the gruesome details, the scene they encountered. Elura Nanos, Law&Crime columnist, with me here in studio, and Lisa Wells, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, with us via Skype. Just going back to some of the witnesses we have heard from on the stand today. We heard from the 911 dispatcher. We heard from a nurse who was one of the first on scene. A number of officers. I mean, how difficult do you imagine it is for these first responders? I mean, just for us watching this, listening to this testimony, reading about it, really gives you chills. It hurts in the pit of your stomach for these first responders to have gone there and seen this, recorded this, witnessed this, and now testifying about it yet again after they've already told their stories to investigators.
I have no doubt that this is extraordinarily difficult and gut-wrenching for all of these first responders. But one of the things that I really just want to point out, especially to our viewers, is, if you're a first responder, you're a police officer, you're a nurse, you're seeing things like this every day.
That is true.
And while not to take anything away from the really, truly horrific nature of this crime, it's not nearly as unusual as we would like to think. And I don't think that makes any of those first responders numb to it. I'm sure that as they go through their day, they are deeply affected. I know I was once a child abuse prosecutor. I was deeply affected by the cases that came across my desk. There were many nights I went home and cried about those cases. But it is so common that I think that that's why you're seeing these folks be able to testify without breaking down on the stand. They know their role in this case. They are at the point where they're about to bring a perpetrator to justice. They're used to this role, and I'm sure that they appreciate the ability to be able to get justice for baby Sterling.
Yeah. Do you agree, Lisa? You know, I mean, they are, you know, this is what they do. Elura's absolutely right. And, you know, think of any kind of crime scene, you know, it's hard to say one is more horrific than the next. Certainly for anyone who has children, you know, when you have a baby like this involved, it does certainly add a little bit more of a gut-wrenching element.
Yeah, and one of the things that they, you know, as soon as they realize that there is a crime, rather than a rescue sort of situation, they're going to go into the mode that they know they need to do to preserve evidence and to make sure justice is.
All right, looks like we got some audio issues again, but we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, live testimony will resume in that Iowa courtroom. Stick around. We're coming back right after this short break. Well, a new witness has just taken the stand in the Iowa courtroom, the Zachary Koehn case. There you see her there, Jennifer Shriver. We're waiting to learn a little bit more information about what she will be testifying as she gets sworn in. I want to just quickly talk about child abuse as an epidemic. As we hear just the absolute heartbreaking, gruesome details of this case, you can get caught up in those details and almost forget the bigger picture here. And I know my guests are all too familiar with this, especially you, Elura, who's with me here in studio as a former children's services prosecutor. But let's just run through some of these statistics. Every year, 3.6 million referrals are made to child protection agencies that involve more than 6.6 million children. The United States has one of the worst records among modern nations. And take a look at this graphic. In 2014, state agencies identified an estimated 1,580 children who died as a result of abuse and neglect. That breaks down to between 4 and 5 children a day. And the bottom line is these incidences of abuse are significantly underreported, right, Elura?
They're underreported, and the reality of the statistics is that they are overwhelming, because the statistics tell us that the #1 cause of death in children ages, I think it's 4 and under, is accident and homicide. Those are the #1 and #2 causes of death. And many of those accidents are actually the result of neglect. So that means that more children die from being murdered at the hands of usually someone close to them than of cancer, than of other illnesses. That is really terrifying. And when you think about that, that means that this is a problem that is very much around us. But yet, if you ask the average person on the street, have they ever called in a report of suspected child abuse, most people wouldn't even know where to begin with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised a really good point. You know, I have done lots of reporting on child abuse over the years. I think back to a series I did here in New York, you know, back in 2006, 2007. I mean, this is an issue that doesn't go away and that sticks around. But you said, you know, if this many children were dying from cancer, were dying from disease, we'd be pouring funding into it. We'd be having rallies. We'd be having marches. In this case, you know, when it comes to child abuse, and this is so tough because there are so many different sides to it. You know, it's not as easy as, oh, let's pledge money to this cause and raise money for research. What can be done? I mean, you mentioned the average person picking up the phone if they see something.
Stacey, I really think that that is the #1 thing to do here, okay? And I am not by any means arguing that everyone should be calling the police on everyone around them all the time. Certainly, we've seen how that's gone wrong when you have people randomly calling 911 where they don't really know what they're talking about. But here's the thing. Every state has some kind of state central registry for child abuse, suspicion of child abuse and maltreatment. You are always welcome to call those lines. You don't need to call 911. You can call the state number, and you can Google that for whatever state you live in. And you can say, I suspect this is happening. It does not mean that that person is going to be arrested that day. What it does mean is that experts who work in the child abuse field will go and will investigate. So I think that people are really worried about getting involved. They're worried certainly about pointing the finger. So yeah, you shouldn't do this unless you have a real reason to suspect something. But honestly, keep your eyes open. You see a young child with bruises that don't look quite right. You see a parent that's really acting more aggressively than would be normal in the situation. Consider looking into it more. Consider speaking up.
Lisa, do you want to add anything before we get back into court?
You know, I really could not agree more with what was just said. And I'm sorry, I have a dog in the background here, so he's feeling better today, apparently. But yeah, it's, you know, there's this balance between privacy of people's homes and, you know, protecting our children. And that's where there's this constant yin and yang between trying to not, quote unquote, get in other people's business and allow them to be the parents that they, you know, that parent the way they want to. But there's a, you know, again, abuse is different than just being parenting differently, and just making a report when you see something that really does look suspicious. And another thing, too, it seems to me that the people that do this job do not get paid enough. And if there were some sort of way to make sure that you get the most qualified people that, and make this job it's got to be, first of all, a very draining job to have, and a very difficult job. But then also, too, to not be paid so well, sadly, it's not going to attract as many people as it could, and that's an important factor as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, all municipalities are different. There are issues with caseloads, so on and so forth. Thank you both for weighing in on this issue. Let's now go back live into the courtroom where a new witness is on the stand. Well, Jennifer Shriver was the next door neighbor, it sounds like, of Zachary Koehn and Cheyenne Harris, and little Sterling. She babysat Sterling often, it sounds like, based on the testimony we've heard so far from her. Well, we are going to take a quick break, but before we do, I want to thank my guest, Lisa Wells, who's been with us live via Skype. And before I let you go, Lisa, I just want to ask you, in terms of Jennifer Shriver's testimony about taking care of the child, I mean, certainly the first thing you think is she babysat the child, she lived next door, certainly she should have known something.
One would think. I don't know how close in time the last babysitting was to the child's death. And then if this was just one of those situations where the child just went downhill rapidly, or if it happened over a period of time. So there's so many unanswered questions to this. I'd like to know, too, you know, it seems like the 2-year-old daughter was in great health the whole time. So this whole thing is just baffling.
A lot of questions, for sure. And you know, you raised a good point. The last we just heard the witness testify was that she was talking about a time in July when she was babysitting Sterling. He was found dead on August 30th. Well, Lisa, thank you again so much for your time and being with us here on Law and Crime today. We do appreciate it. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, more live from Iowa. Stay with us. Jennifer Shriver, Zachary Koehn and Cheyenne Harris's neighbor, testifying about her relationship, watching little Sterling, babysitting the baby for them, and also the day he was discovered dead. I'm curious, Elura, I imagine you had the similar reaction to mine to hear her testify that Zachary was out on the street smoking a cigarette after he had found the baby dead, as opposed to calling 911.
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously very strange. We would expect her to testify that when his son was discovered dead, that this guy flipped out and acted the way we would expect a parent to act. But, you know, in many ways, this woman is a no-lose witness, because no matter what she says, if she says he was upset, then it tugs at the heartstrings. If she says he wasn't upset, then it shows that he's got some kind of mental issue going on. So no matter what she says, it's really just going to help the prosecution.
And they asked her, you know, if you had known they had needed formula or diapers or wipes, would you have given it to him? She said, yeah, or I would have found, you know, a way to get it to them. So, I mean, that, I guess, goes to the point that they made no efforts to, you know, this wasn't a matter of being dirt poor. They couldn't procure
exactly right.
The baby supplies.
Right, because we're trying to prove the underlying child endangerment here. And if it were very easy for them to get what the child needs and they decided not to do it, there's your child endangerment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly it will be interesting to see how this plays out as this trial continues. Your final thoughts before I sign off for the day?
Same thing that I said before. This just brings up, if you see something, say something. Don't be afraid to call, because it could be your neighbor that's having this kind of horrific situation going on right next door to you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, and thank you for being with me here this afternoon, Elura. That is going to do it for me here on Law and Crime, but stay tuned because, of course, the Daily Debrief with Aaron Keller coming up. He'll be joined in studio here by our own Brian Ross, so stick around. Much more from the Zachary trial, as well as the breaking news today about James Whitey Bulger. Thanks so much. Aaron's coming up right after this break. Stick around.